Okay, so in this video I have sped up the process of modelling this ship just so that we can get through it without it being too boring. So I'm just narrating over the top of it, and the first thing I'm doing here is I'm basically starting with a plane which I've turned into an editable poly, and I've set up symmetry straight away. I've set it up so that I can model both sides at the same time. This button that I've just pressed, if I stop this for a second, this one that I've just pressed here, this basically allows you to see the end result of symmetry on the editable poly, so you can work on this level but basically see the effect on both sides, which is really handy when you're using things like symmetry, because you can kind of see the result of the the effect of what you do on both sides, but you're basically just working on one side. So that's what that is, and I'll clear that. So I basically am using simple techniques. I'm not doing anything that's particularly exciting. I'm just fighting the this ribbon at the minute to try and get it to actually show the tools I need. It's really useful. I'm using Swift Loop here to try and get some form into these planes, and the reason I'm working on a plane is just so that a lot of time if you're working on a shape and you're just trying to get the form or something, having the back faces on it, like underneath it and things like that, can be a bit confusing. So I decided that I was just going to work on it at a plane at a time. So I'm just building the top of this thing first. It kind of makes sense. So all I'm doing there to pull out those faces is I'm in edge mode on editable poly. I am double clicking to select multiple edges, like the edge loop, and then I'm just holding shift down and pulling it out in the direction I want to extrude it, and it will do that, so I don't need to like hit extrude or anything like that. So like what I've just done there, and then I'm just scaling it in and trying to kind of move it in roughly into place. So there are other tools for doing this type of stuff that are probably more accurate, but I'm doing something that's low poly, and I'm just trying to rough the shape in. The other thing with this, which is unusual, is that whilst I'm working off some reference, I'm not going to stick to it religiously. I'm not even really that interested in sticking to it. I'm just using it as a base, and so what I'm doing here is actually exploring what I'm going to do is just explore some ideas. So in this 3D phase, it's taking me a bit longer than it probably should do, and I definitely have made a few mistakes along the way to try and get the form I'm after, but ultimately, I've got something that's okay, and I mean it'd be okay for this demonstration to take it to the next phase. So all I'm doing there is I'm cutting into the surface so that I can basically make this cockpit area. So I'm just trying to find, I'm essentially establishing by extruding out the initial edge that supports it. I am basically giving it a base or a foundation to work from, and then once I've cut where I want it to extrude from, I'm just extruding it out and kind of manipulating it and moving it around. And as you can see, at the point at which it hits the symmetry line, it just welds together. So it kind of doesn't really matter too much what's happening on the other side of the line, other that it can get a bit confusing. But again, even at this stage, I'm just trying to find some forms that roughly work. I'm just going to tweak some verts as I do most of the way through this, so that I can then start to find the next part, which is the cockpit actual on top. So just continue to manipulate. Now I'm just welding a few points, so I'm using the target weld on the fractals ribbon, and I'm moving some points around so they match a bit closer to my reference. So this is one of the issues you get here, where you're trying to cut across the surface, but actually the point that you're cutting to is beyond the symmetry line. So it around that symmetry line, it can get a bit like soup. Sometimes it's a good idea to just switch the symmetry off and then go back in and just fix a few things and then go back into your symmetry, which looks like that's exactly what I am doing right now, because it was just getting a bit crazy. So a bit more welding. You want to keep it as neat as you can as you're going along. You don't want to. So if you're going to cut into surfaces and things like that, you always want to make sure that you're kind of using 4-sided shapes or triangles, no end-ons, and where possible, you're always welding stuff. And after you've done this for a while, you start to work out where the problem areas are. There's a bit later on in this I somehow managed to extrude things as separate faces, and it just turns into polygon soup because you don't see it at the time. So you start to move some verts around, then you start having problems. As you can see, I'm just basically cutting a few extra edges in just so that they give me a bit more control. Cutting an edge in like that doesn't, if you're going from a triangle, one point to another, doesn't actually create any more geometry, because that edge is there already, it's just hidden. But by cutting it in, you're basically telling it that it's definitely going in that direction and not any other direction. So sometimes it's, unless you definitely need quads, it's a good idea to sometimes, with low poly stuff, to cut those triangles in where you need them. So I'm just creating an extra bit of a skirt there. And here I'm using a material, I think I go ahead and set a new one up. Maybe I don't. So this is basically just a material with, in fact, let's have a look. So this material here is basically, I've given it a colour and I've set its opacity to 50%, and that basically makes it see-through. The great thing about setting a material up and then applying it to the model means you can see through your onto your reference material, but you can still see the polys. And actually, by turning this up or down, you can control the opacity. You can also use X-ray mode if you want, which does a similar thing, but I just think you have less control, and it's easy to just, when you want to see the thing solid, you just pull a material onto it, and when you want to see it see-through, you pull a see-through material onto it. So why wouldn't you do it that way? So I'm just cutting back into this surface so that I can start to pull out what would be the start of the wing section, and I'm just welding back into that surface so that there's a connection between the two areas. And once I've got that in place, I'm just going to extrude that out, and that's going to be the start of my wing. I'm pulling that point up in the middle just to start to get some shape, and you see how I'm cutting back across those 2 points to basically create that wing shape. And then it's just a case of massaging the points to start to get a feel for the form. So I started out trying to cut that, and then thought it seemed like it was more hassle than it was worth. I had an issue there where I lost some of the recording, so it does jump a bit, but I'm not doing anything overly exciting that I haven't been doing previously. I'm just trying to find that shape at the back. Here I'm just using a cylinder to represent the engine, so I'm just trying to get the size of it in so that I can see kind of the volume that I'm going to need for that to sit in. So I've got this idea here that what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the cylinder shape as a starting point for making the back kind of guard piece that's in the reference. So I'm looking at making that as a separate thing now. I'm kind of making it a bit more of a feature. So all I've done is made a copy of the cylinder, and I'm kind of cutting it, well I'm cutting into it to try and make this other piece. What I'm going to do is make one half of it, and then I'm going to use symmetry, and I'm going to use a tool, a modifier called shell, which will basically extrude out or give it a shell, give it thickness, which is a handy tool. So I want to give it a bit of form. So I'm going to use an FFD deformer so that it kind of retains the shape, but all I'm doing is kind of pulling it round a bit to get something a bit more interesting. The FFD deformers are great for this kind of work. So what it does is the FFD just basically creates like a lattice around the object, and you can select the control points and basically move those control points. And I've done the FFD. I'm going to put some symmetry on it. I can get both sides. Weird snaps things going on there. Now whack a shell on top. You're starting to get a shape. So I'm dropping a piece in that's going to be part of the wing. I want the wings to be able to articulate potentially so that we can get some animation in. So I essentially need a bracket that's going to hang out of the side of the ship. We're going to build this wing section now. So I'm starting with I just made a duplicate of the piece I've already got there, and I'm going to use that as a starting point. It saves me trying to make something new and align it. So I was just hiding that so it's not in the way. I'm just moving these points around to get the form where I want. I'm extruding just to get a bit of shape into it, and these round sections I'm going to boolean out. So I'm going to grab this edge and stick a chamfer on it, and that'll just give me a bit more interesting going on there. I can then pull those points around where I want. I'm going to pull out a cylinder. That's going to be the basis for my boolean. I'll take any extra segments out of it so that they don't get transferred into the shape. Booleans are a bit dangerous, really. You have to be very careful with them because they create lots of extra geometry you don't need generally. We select Pro Boolean, we pick the object we want to cut with, and it says the operation's a subtraction. I'm going to do the same thing with this one. So select the object, few less sides, and then pick it. Oh, that's because I've not got it properly. Start picking, and then it'll cut through. But as you can see, we're in Engon City. With this, I actually want the top face. I'm not bothered about the rest of it. Control I to invert, delete the faces I don't need. And then with what I've got left, I'm going to do an inset. That's going to create my interior. And we get a little bit of overlap here, but that's pretty common. So tidy that up by welding it together. That's nice and neat now. And then, so we have our edges and then we have our face along the top. So I'm going to use the fact that I've got a few extra polys here on the back side of it to cut across, so I can get the front side of it. And we're just trying to get some of these areas back into being quads, triangles, make them nice and neat. I just wanted to create a nice end for this, just to neaten it up. I don't know if you'll even see it in the final thing, but again, I'm just grabbing these edges, so I've extruded that out and then I'm just chamfering the edges to get something that's quite nice and rounded. Again, it would be a good idea to get that cut across those faces and get them quadded up, but I'll do that later. For now, we're just trying to get there. So what I'm doing here is I'm just rotating the wing to see how it potentially could work. So I've gone into the effect pivot area. So if you look, I'm in this panel here. This is where most of the modelling stuff goes on. So if you go into the next panel along, then you can change things like its pivot. So I've basically I've actually moved its pivot to a different place to try and see where's the best place for it to rotate around. So if you need to ever go in and center things, stuff like that, you can use these alignment tools. So the good thing about doing it this way is then I can start to see where there might be problems, where it won't, like this area here, it feels like it's a bit too close and it might penetrate, so I'm going to move that. So ideally what you want to do is you want to find a way that the wing looks good when it's folded in and it also looks good when it's folded out. I'm just testing the size of the guy against the thing again. I mean, it may be unnecessary this step, but it's just a case of showing that you can make things look real. All I'm doing here is trying to get him looking like he's sitting down. To be fair, I could have just done this in one mesh. It probably would have been just as, but it seemed at the time that it would have made more sense to 2 copies and kind of move all the legs at once in one go. And obviously this isn't anything that's going to stay in the final thing, so it was more a case of just cobbling together something that more or less gave the sort of dimensions that we needed. So there you go, and it's now sitting down. Nothing particularly pro about that. Bit of a hack job. I was going to move the arms, but then they were all on separate pivots, so I ended up just thinking, well, I don't actually really need the bits underneath, so I actually just need the shoulders. So there we go. Okay, so in this part I'm just starting to lay in what I think will be the gun section. This is where it starts to really deviate from the original concept. I quite liked, I'd looked at some reference in Pinterest, and I really like the idea that these would be separate things, and that actually would add a bit more of a feature, because when the ship flips over, I imagine it doing like a barrel roll or something like that. It would be a bit more interesting if these were like guns that basically go along the length of the ship. You can't see all of them until it turns over. So I just threw them in as a bit of a placeholder, so that when I went to build the rest of the front of the ship, I knew roughly where those parts were going to be. I then was going to come back to them later. So that means that I'm going to do something slightly different with the front of the ship now, make it a bit more, give it more of a kind of nose rather than what probably would have been there, would have been some kind of scoop. So I'm going to delete that part and kind of bring that back in. So grab the edge, held shift down, pulled it down in Z, and then selected an edge, hit bridge, select the other edge, and that bridges the two parts together. Bridge is a really useful tool. So double clicked on the edge, got myself a loop, hold shift down, pull it out to extrude out every edge. Now I'm just trying to find a form for the front of this thing. Just a bit of manipulation, moving some bits around, trying to find an overall shape that works, not too bad. I pulled this edge out at the bottom just to kind of find the shape, and then what I was going to do is work that back in. So again, bridge isn't going to work on this one. It was worth a try, but it was never going to work, so I capped it instead. So I selected the edge and the edges, and then hit cap, and then it cut. Turn it back into a couple of triangles, just to keep it nice and neat more than anything else. It would have been fine, not like that. Good for edge flow. If any of this video is going too quick, I would just advise you slow it down and have a look. I missed a lot of stuff. A lot of it is rinse and repeat, so it kind of makes more sense for you to run it a bit faster and kind of get a sense of what's going on. Otherwise, it would be quite long. I just stick in a quick auto smooth with the smoothing groups. The purpose of this will probably suffice fine, but it was just to get a sense that the form is working. If you don't deal with your smoothing groups, you tend to have problems later on down the line in that they just don't look right. But now starting to have a look at this gun area is going to be, drop some swift loops in so that I can start to give this thing some shape. Going to make this bit quite boxy just to give it a bit of contrast to the rest of it. I always want them to look like they're bolted on. So I'm using inset and extrude just to these details in there, so that's where the laser or whatever it is that comes out of there is. Manipulating the verts around a bit so that we change the scale of things, distribution of things. Using inset again so that I can extrude out a bit of detail. Weld it so it's like a wedge that's coming out and the points round. As you can hide there, I could have easily just used isolate. Tend to use what takes my fancy, I think, when it comes to stuff like that. inset again, extrude. So we've got most of those pieces blocked in now.